That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Alright guys, I got a lot of great feedback on the video yesterday. I mean, I think this is a conversation that most people are going to start having in the Dynasty community. They're just going to have to come around, they're going to have to look at the numbers, they're going to have to start realizing how you can really take advantage of your league mates and how you can get an edge and try to compound your bets together by stacking real life NFL teams on our Dynasty team and trying to bet on the talent and trying to bet on the unpredictability that could lead us to winning our fantasy championships. So yesterday I talked about Jimmy Garoppolo and George Kittle. Obviously, every draft is going to be different. You're going to be drafting from different ranges. Your league is going to value different players at different evaluations. So we have to be flexible. We can't go in and have one specific game plan and try to target very specific players. We have to have a number of things that we can do. So I'm going to go through a second stack that you should be able to complete if you're in a startup this offseason, or even if you have maybe Russell Wilson or DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett. Any one of these guys, you can go out there, try to gauge the price on the other ones. I mean, if you're part of the Patreon and you need some advice on this, if you want some strategy help, make sure you just shoot me a DM. I love to talk to the people on Patreon. I find that y'all are really extremely knowledgeable and are better Dynasty players than the majority of people out here actually with their own podcast talking about what they saw on their laptop when they were watching tape, even though what they're saying really doesn't matter. I mean, the people who actually play in these Dynasty leagues really know a lot and have a great grasp on it, so I love talking with y'all. Now, let's get into this stack and let's talk about why I believe this could help win fantasy leagues this season. So first, let's start with the quarterback. Let's talk about Russell Wilson, who I know, Russell Wilson's expensive. Russell Wilson's not a cheap quarterback like Jimmy Garoppolo yesterday, but there's great reason for that. So in Dynasty, I mean, we don't really have to worry about Russell Wilson's long-term outlook. He's 31 years old, and I know some people are going to say, hey, I mean, he's a running quarterback. Maybe his career is shortened a little bit from the hits he takes. Guys, I mean, that's kind of a ridiculous take with Russell Wilson. We can't necessarily compare him to a Cam Newton. I mean, Russell Wilson has started 8 seasons for the Seattle Seahawks. And you know how many games he's played in every single season? All 16. I mean, the man does not miss a game. The man doesn't take big hits. He's really smart with how he decides to run, and I don't think we should be worried about his long-term value. This is a guy that's going to be similar to a Drew Brees, to a Ben Roethlisberger, to a Phillip Rivers. He's going to play in the NFL for an extremely long time. He has the arm talent if he decides he has to transition to a pocket passer later on in his career. So buying him in Dynasty, you don't really have to worry about any long-term value loss. Really, we can just look at the short-term production and know that the long-term production will be there. And let's try to evaluate what we think he can do in 2020. So let's talk about what he did in 2019 first. That way we can try to gauge this projected to 2020. So in 2019, he had 32 attempts a game, 256 passing yards, almost 2 touchdowns a game, and he really had no interceptions. I mean, this is something that we are going to see regress. Interceptions are kind of random if you look at the numbers year to year. Obviously, some quarterbacks are susceptible to more interceptions, like a Jameis Winston, but we have to understand that this is going to be volatile. This isn't something that we can really predict like yards per attempt, and it's not going to be too sticky. But nonetheless, interceptions don't really matter too much in fantasy leagues. If you play in any of our Flock Patreon leagues, we don't even give negative points for interceptions just because they're the hardest to predict, and really, you should not necessarily be too worried about them in fantasy. Now, rushing the ball, this is how he also provides you some value. So he averaged 21 rushing yards a game last season, but I know what y'all are saying. Mason, 21 rushing yards a game, that's pretty much nothing. Guys, we have to keep in mind that really equates to about like 50 passing yards a game. 21 rushing yards a game is significant, especially if you compare him to a quarterback like a Phillip Rivers, where maybe the passing looks similar, but 21 rushing yards a game, 3 total touchdowns in 2019 is going to bump up his points per game by about 2.5, maybe close to 3, which over the long run can win you some games. Now, similar to Jimmy Garoppolo, one of the reasons I evaluated Russell Wilson as a guy that maybe has a higher ceiling than most people are projecting is this Seattle Seahawks team is significantly run heavy, and most people are projecting them to be significantly run heavy in 2020. But like I say all the time, we cannot necessarily expect that to stick from year to year, and there are going to be years and there are going to be fluctuations where a team has to go off script and they have to decide to throw the ball more or run the ball. So we look at the Seattle Seahawks situation going into 2020. Yes, they bring in Carlos Hyde, but both of their really only talented running backs on the roster, Rashad Penny and Chris Carson, are currently injured, and who knows if they'll be ready to go at the beginning of the season. So what if Pete Carroll looks at his personnel this season and says, you know what, we have to air it out more. We have a top 3 quarterback in the NFL when it comes to pure talent, and we have to lean on him when we don't have our running backs and go away from our game plan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at Russell Wilson's stats if we change it and just give him an increase of 15% in volume, which I know y'all are going to say, Mason, 15% sounds like a lot, but in reality, this is going to bring him from being 24th in the league in pass attempts to 12th. So, I mean, it's not really too big of a jump whatsoever. He's still going to be near the league average in pass attempts and volume. But the thing with Russell Wilson is his efficiency is through the roof just because of the talent of quarterback he is. So let's say he gets this 15% bump in volume, and let's translate this over to his 2020 projected stats. So if this happens, he'll be throwing 37 pass attempts a game, 295 yards, a little over 2 touchdowns, and interceptions. We're not going to try to project those just because they are so volatile, and I'm not going to mess with his rushing yards. I think that would be kind of unfair for me to do, and maybe showing a little bit biased, me just trying to get a hot take out on this video. And rushing yards, I'm just going to keep them the same. He's a year older. Maybe he even drops back more, but he decides to run out of the pocket less due to his age. So we're going to keep those the same. Yet, if we look at these new statistics, if we give him 15% more volume, this would put him at 23.76 points per game, which would be good for the quarterback 2 in 2020. So guys, if we are looking at this Russell Wilson profile, he's currently being drafted as the quarterback 6 in Dynasty. He's the most stable quarterback in pretty much the entire NFL when it comes to starting games and providing you with the high floor. Yet due to the personnel going into 2020, he has the best passing weapons he's ever had, and he has pretty much no starting running back. They may be forced to throw the ball, and if this happens and he just throws the ball slightly more, he has the upside to be the quarterback 2, or possibly even the quarterback 1 if we want to be more aggressive and give him a top 10 pass attempts per game. I just didn't want to go out there and push it that far on this video. He has the upside to finish as the quarterback 1, and that's what we are looking for. So, like I said in the last video, when we are trying to attempt stacks, there's a strong correlation to if a quarterback beats his ADP, his pass catchers are going to beat their ADP more times than not, just because the way math works, just because the way these target distribution works. So what I love about the Seattle Seahawks target distribution is it's extremely condensed. We know the guys that are going to be getting targets, and it's not going to be extremely spread out like we would see in San Francisco, where maybe George Kittle is the guy getting the targets, but then outside of that, it's spread all over the place. In Seattle, we know there's going to be 2 guys getting the target distribution. So if we see a bump in volume for Russell Wilson, they are going to get a bump in volume as well. So first, let's talk about Tyler Lockett, Russell Wilson's wide receiver 1 for the past couple of years. I mean, Tyler Lockett has been criminally underrated every single season with what he provides in terms of both NFL value and fantasy value. So let's look at his 2019 stats and look at where they may be if we just give him also the bump in 15% of volume from 2019 to 2020, like we were doing with the overall passing game. So we are going to keep Tyler Lockett, who is currently 27 years old, in his prime, just on pace. He's just going to stay in the offense. His role is not going to increase. And this would bring him from 5.1 receptions to 5.9, 66 yards to 76 yards, and we're going to keep his touchdowns the same because they are volatile, and I don't want to push the buttons on this video. I want to try to be passive with these projections, and I don't want to get crazy. So if we give him this 15% increase, and he hits almost 6 receptions a game, 75 yards a game, and we keep his same touchdown mark that he had in 2019, this would put him at 16.5 points per game, good for the wide receiver 9. I mean, guys, this is what we are looking for. We are looking for guys that both have the floor and the ceiling, especially if we know that if one hits, the other is going to as well, and it's going to be a compound growth in fantasy value on our team, and is going to inch us closer to having our odds higher than our league mates to win that fantasy title. So now, I'm not going to stop here. Like I said, the target distribution in Seattle should be extremely condensed in 2020. So if Tyler Lockett is getting a bump, I mean, I don't think we should project DK Metcalf to not get a bump as well, especially when DK Metcalf is going from his rookie season to his sophomore season. So there should be natural progression, not only in what he sees in opportunity, but also his talent. Right now, DK Metcalf is actually being drafted as a low-end wide receiver 1 in Dynasty, which I am completely fine with. He plays in the offense, he has the role, and he has the production on his profile so far that warrants this. In redraft, it's a different story, just because in redraft, you're obviously not caring about a player's age as much, and he's being drafted as a low-end wide receiver 2 at the wide receiver 21 to 23 range. Now, let's try to project him and progress him from 2019, his rookie statistics, to 2020. So, let's say DK Metcalf progresses. He comes on strong, and he's a significantly better route runner, which we saw him actually improve down the stretch, especially in the Seattle playoff games last season. You saw a completely different wide receiver at the end of the year that we saw at the beginning of the year, and I think we should expect this to naturally progress going into 2020. And if the volume in the overall offense gets a bump, I think we should see DK Metcalf skyrocket. So I know there are a ton of injuries across the Seattle Seahawks team. They have no clear wide receiver 3. There is discussions of them bringing in Antonio Brown, but as of now, it's DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and nobody else. So I think it's safe to say that even though we only raised Tyler Lockett's production by 15%, and we raised the overall offense by 15%, I think it's safe to say DK Metcalf can steal some targets from the running backs, from the tight end group, and from the wide receiver 3 on this team last year, just because maybe he is the best wide receiver on this team. Maybe it's in his range of outcomes that he's a top 5 wide receiver talent in the league a year or two from now. I mean, it is in the range of outcomes. I'm not saying it's likely, but like I said, if we are betting on this overall offense to beat their expectations, DK Metcalf should be a part of that. So we are going to increase his rookie statistics to his sophomore statistics by 25% in volume and see where we get. So let's bump his 3.6 receptions up in 2019 to 4.5, his 56 yards to 70 yards, and his half a touchdown a game to 0.6 touchdowns a game. So this would be good for 15.55 fantasy PPR points per game in 2020, and that would have put him at the wide receiver 14 in 2019. So DK Metcalf is a guy that, yeah, you may have to put a little bit of premium on a price you're going to pay in Dynasty. Maybe you draft him as the wide receiver 12, wide receiver 13, and he only projects to be that in 2020, and he's not going to beat his ADP. But what we have to understand is with DK Metcalf, you're not necessarily buying 2020 production. If he gives you this 2020 production, it's at a premium and it's going to skyrocket his dynasty value. So when you make this compounding bet, not only is it for you to win your dynasty league in 2020, but it's for you to accumulate value on your dynasty roster through the growing seasons. So guys, I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. I thought that it was extremely useful. If you did, make sure you go down there. Make sure you give it a like. Make sure you subscribe. Comment what you think. Comment if you want me to talk about more of these team stacks, because I think people really look at the wrong situations when they are trying to execute this, and there are clear situations that we can. I think tomorrow I'm going to talk about AJ Brown and Ryan Tannehill and keep it consistent with these run-heavy offenses that may not be as run-heavy in 2020 as we're projecting, and try to lean with the variance. But thanks guys, really hope y'all enjoyed it, and have a great day.
That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.